Drug Enforcement, and Sarah Latta to be Director of U.S. Marshal Service are being considered for the first time, and under committee rules will be voted on next week. The nomination of Jason Quinones to be U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida is ready for a vote today, and I look forward to supporting his nomination. The 8 bills on the committee are part of the Senate's traditional Judiciary Committee's longstanding bipartisan commitment to law enforcement that we do this time of the year. It's a true testament to the bipartisan nature of National Police Week. Today's markup has 4 Republican-led bills and 4 Democrat-led bills. So I thank Ranking Member Durbin and his staff for working with us on this side of the aisle to put together this agenda. And I'd like to thank all members of the committee for their continued support of this long-standing tradition. Law enforcement across the country put their lives on the line every day. This year, I led a resolution with Senator Durbin honoring 234 officers who made the ultimate sacrifice and are being recognized as line of duty deaths. This includes 2 of my fellow Iowans, Trooper Jeffrey Brown and Senior Police Officer Tran Phucom. The devotion of these officers merits our admiration and will be deeply indebted to them. I'm pleased my resolution with Senator Durbin passed the Senate with over 80 co-sponsors, demonstrating the overwhelming support of the United States Senate for law enforcement. The bills on today's agenda are a good example of extensive problems facing our law enforcement community. They deal with recruitment and retention issues, protecting law enforcement from the dangers of fentanyl, providing law enforcement with the equipment they need to serve our communities, protecting families of first responders, and providing resources for mental health of law enforcement. Like my colleagues, I back the blue. And when I see law enforcement, I'll take the chance to tell them thank you for keeping the peace, and I'm not for defending the police. That's why I'm pleased that we're able to have so many bills on the agenda. Each of the bills will help law enforcement and first responders throughout our nation. Once these bills are out of committee, I look forward to quickly moving them on the Senate floor. I've heard some criticism from Democrats about the Trump administration's reallocation of resources within the Justice Department, but there's a great deal of positive news from this administration that we should recognize. Effective law enforcement and responsible spending are not incompatible. The administration's focus on returning federal law enforcement to its core mission of combating violent crime has delivered results. FBI Director Patel was sworn in only a few months ago, but under his leadership, the agency has already brought into custody 3 of the top 10 most wanted fugitives, including a key leader of MS-13 who has been extradited from Mexico facing justice in this country. In early March, Department of Justice and FBI secured the arrest of one of the key orchestrators of the deadly ISIS-K attack at Abbey Gate, which killed 13 young servicemen during the withdrawal from Afghanistan. More recently, in May, 115 children were rescued, and 205 predators were arrested in the FBI's Operation Restore Justice, protecting our nation's most vulnerable. Even without a permanent administrator, the DEA has delivered similar results as part of Operation Take Back America in partnership with other federal and state law enforcement. The DEA accomplished its largest seizure of illicit fentanyl to date, consisting of 2 7/10 million potential lethal pills. We could all go on, but the president's focus on taking down violent criminals has brought to justice many of the worst, targeting dangerous criminals and terrorists who threaten America's safety and way of life. And I applaud these early accomplishments and look forward to more. Part of the administration's effort to refocus on violent crime included evaluation of inappropriate spending from the previous administration. Here are some of the examples of programs that we're spending taxpayer dollars on. We were spending over $600,000 on podcast series, blog, and academic conference presentations. Seems to me we ought to use these resources to prosecute crime instead of just talking about crime. Some grants appear to be aimed at sending children into dangerous situations to mediate gang conflict. We ought to take a hard look at that spending. That said, in April, I wrote the Justice Department for clarity about its plan to grant funds. I'd like to enter their response into the record, and without opposition, I'll do that. The Justice Department told me 93% of the terminations affect grants awarded to non-governmental agencies. The Justice Department plans to reallocate funds from terminated grants to new grants that would effectively support law enforcement. To those worried about grant cuts, I'll say Congress has the ability to authorize spending, and several bills on today's agenda do just that. I look forward to advancing those bills yet today. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Chairman Grassley. We're 115 days into the second Trump administration. Attorney General Bondi's Department of Justice, I'm afraid, is resisting this committee's efforts at oversight. To date, I have sent 18 oversight requests to the Department of Justice, received 2 responses, and they were cursory. One involved a simple records preservation request. It took the department 76 days to respond, and they wouldn't even commit to preserving the records. Contrast this with the Justice Department's response to Chairman Grassley. By your count, you've received responses to almost half of your letters, and the department has provided thousands of pages of documents that you've requested. During my 4 years as chair of the committee, I pressed the Biden Justice Department to respond to oversight requests from Democrats and Republicans alike. In June 2021, only 5 months into the Biden administration, I convened a bipartisan meeting between Judiciary Committee members and Attorney General Merrick Garland to discuss the need to respond to committee's requests. I restored the committee's longstanding tradition of holding regular oversight hearings. At this point in the Biden administration, we had convened oversight hearings with the FBI director and the Bureau of Prisons, and I held a Justice Department oversight hearing with Attorney General Garland a few months later. Why does this committee's oversight of the Justice Department matter? Let me take a moment to briefly discuss my latest request to Attorney General Bondi. As President Trump confirmed a few days ago, his administration is in talks with the state of Qatar to receive a private jet as a gift from the royal family. This aircraft would be retrofitted to act as Air Force One for the remainder of Trump's term in office, and then ownership would be transferred to Trump personally and the Trump Presidential Library Foundation. The president claimed it would be, quote, stupid to say, no, we don't want a free, very expensive airplane. What the president failed to say was that it would cost American taxpayers more than the value of the airplane to outfit it to be Air Force One. And of equal importance, the Constitution, which we've all sworn to uphold and defend, is expressed on the issue of gifts or emoluments from foreign sources. The Constitution gives Congress the power to control whether any officer of the United States, including the president, may accept a gift from, quote, any king, prince, or foreign state. This gift clearly violates the Constitution and the laws enacted by Congress to govern such gifts. Yet Attorney General Bondi reportedly produced a legal memorandum concluding that it would be, quote, legally permissible, close quote, for the president to accept this airplane from this foreign power. This committee and the American people need to see her legal rationale that purportedly permits this unprecedented gift. I've requested that memo be produced. There are also grave concerns with Attorney General Bondi participating in any matter involving the state of Qatar. Given that she was a registered foreign agent of that government who lobbied the Qatari government prior to her confirmation as Attorney General, there are obvious questions to be asked and answered. During her confirmation process, Attorney General Bondi failed to list the state of Qatar as a conflict of interest. When I asked her about it, she refused to commit to recusing herself from matters involving this foreign power. She claimed she would, quote, consult with career ethics officials within the Justice Department and make the appropriate decision. However, Trump political appointees have conveniently removed the senior career ethics officials who would advise on such decisions and put their duties in the hands of two inexperienced political appointees beholden to the Attorney General. In light of these significant ethical concerns, I've also requested that Attorney General Bondi provide information related to any ethical consultation on her involvement in the Trump administration's consideration of this gift. Let's not forget that President Trump confirmed reports of this gift merely weeks after his family personally landed a deal for a Trump-branded luxury golf resort where? In Qatar. For years, the Republicans have baselessly claimed that President Biden engaged in criminal wrongdoing, but Republicans continue to turn a blind eye to President Trump pocketing millions and millions of dollars at the expense of American people while testing the limits of the Constitution. Mr. Chairman, I have two requests. First, let's convene a meeting with Attorney General Bondi as soon as possible to discuss responding to our oversight request, as I did with Attorney General Merrick Garland. Second, it's imperative that we hear from her as well, and FBI Director Patel under oath. I hope that we can convene these oversight hearings as quickly as possible. I yield.
Can I respond or ask you a question?
Sure, go ahead.
Is that, you mean beyond our regular oversight hearings that we have with the Attorney General and the FBI Director, or part of that?
Do you remember when Biden took office and we raised I think you led it, and we all joined in, the bipartisan request that they answer our request, our letters and such. And you didn't like the way you were treated. I didn't like the way you were treated. So we brought Merrick Garland in and personally talked to him on a bipartisan basis of our relationship with the Department of Justice. I think we need to do it again.
Okay. I want to respond to what you said about oversight letters. First of all, I want to make it very clear that I think every member of Congress, not just Senator Durbin as ranking member or my as chairman, ought to get answers to your oversight letters. The other thing is, I think back that up with my actions way back in 2017 when the first Trump administration said that they were only going to answer letters from chairmen of committees, which means that about 80% of the members of the Congress would never get answers to their letters. And I did that not only by writing and getting that reversed by that administration. Now, maybe that reversal didn't do much good, but we still got it reversed. And I testified before the House Oversight Committee, or maybe it was the Judiciary Committee, on the very same subject, that not only chairman, but ranking members, but all 535 members of Congress are entitled to answers to their letters. Now, I'd like to respond to what you said. During the 117th Congress, when I was ranking member of this committee, at many executive committee meetings, I raised issues with the Biden Justice Department non-responsive to my oversight letters. I repeatedly asked Biden Justice and FBI for in-person meetings to get answers, but that never happened. The committee did convene one fairly brief phone call with committee members and Attorney General Garland I'll have some statistics here. I don't think that changed a thing. The committee's lack of further effort obviously resulted in the Biden Justice Department stiff-arming us on this committee. Take, for example, my 144 outstanding justice oversight letters. Not once did I get a fully responsive production from the Biden Justice Department. So let's not pretend for a minute that last administration was a benchmark for responsiveness. Moreover, last Congress, the Biden Justice Department produced a classified report about the John Durham investigation. As you all recall, that investigation further unpacked the already discredited Crossfire Hurricane investigation. The Biden Justice Department gave access to that classified only to the chairman, ranking member, and one staffer for each. Everyone else was boxed out. When I became chairman, I renegotiated those terms to include all members of this committee, Republican or Democrat, and a staffer for each. And I made sure that the Justice Department bring that document here to the Senate, and I demanded that members and staff be allowed to take notes. Notes weren't allowed at Congress, weren't allowed last Congress. The Justice Department and intelligence community relented. So things have already begun to change for better with this administration and this Congress, and whatever you want me to do, help you get answers to your question, I will be glad to do it. It's my responsibility. As you said, you contacted Garland for us.
Chairman, I did, and I do it again, and I do it for any member of the committee to get an answer. And what we're facing right now with this gift from Qatar of a plane worth $400 million or whatever it is, it's entirely appropriate for us to ask the Attorney General for a copy of the memorandum where she said it was legally permissible for this administration to take possession of that airplane. And the fact that she was a foreign agent of this government, Qatar, that she was a paid lobbyist for that government as well, raises some ethical issues that need to be addressed directly. It's timely, we should do it. To ignore it is to walk away from our responsibility.
I want to speak about that in my issue, not directly to what you just said. And if it's I don't know why that document shouldn't be made available, but I think I need more reason before I can say that with the certainty that you'd like to have me say it.
Mr. Chair, down here, Tom Tillis. You're right. The other Tom, we look a lot alike.
I'd like to speak first, and then
Okay.
I'll call on anybody that wants to speak. I find it interesting that my Democrat colleague continued to bring up the emolument clause regarding Trump. They did so in his first term and have done so again with respect to the airplane. Yet my Democrat colleagues never cared about my emolument clause oversight during the March 2016. At that time, I wrote the Obama Justice Department. That letter was based on Secretary Clinton's 2009 to 2013 financial disclosures when she was Secretary of State. Those disclosures showed her husband participated in at least 62 events in foreign states. Some of those were speaking events in connection with foreign governments, and some speaking events were financially supported by foreign governments. For example, on at least 2 occasions, Bill Clinton received hundreds of thousands of dollars for appearances sponsored by Middle Eastern governments. Bill Clinton also received $200,000 for a speech connected to the Chinese government. In another example, Bill Clinton received almost $200,000 for a speech sponsored by a foreign city. In at least one example, Bill Clinton received $500,000 for a speech in Moscow. That speech was funded by the Russian Investment Bank, whose senior members included former Russian intelligence personnel. I wrote about that example in 2017. Hillary and Bill Clinton were married, and she was Secretary of State when all that money was made. Thus, it was a joint income. As my investigation work has shown, Hillary Clinton directly received money from foreign governments while Secretary of State. Moreover, Bill Clinton's speaking fees appear to have increased from $150,000 to sometimes 500,000 or even 750,000 when Hillary became Secretary of State. I don't recall hearing my colleagues on the other side of the aisle showing any interest in these apparent violations of emoluments. When Democrats filed suit against President Trump in his first term, they argued before the courts that the foreign emolument clause, quote, regulates the private conduct of federal officials, end of quote. They claim he was violating the clause through his private businesses, and so Congress couldn't use the, quote, power of the purse, unquote, to correct things. Well, that's not the case. Now they're arguing that Trump's violating the emolument clause for what clearly isn't for his private use, but is instead a gift to the United States. In any event, when an emolument clause violation occurs, a remedy is to disgorge the emolument to the federal government. Here's an example with Trump, and unlike Clinton, the federal government would be a recipient of the airplane, and the plane reportedly won't be used by Trump outside of government, and rather it may be parked in a presidential library, which is ultimately operated by National Archives. Senator Coons, you want the floor.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thanks to both you and the ranking member for the long bipartisan tradition of Police Week. I'm the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus with Senator Cornyn. We had a very productive and very well-attended event here yesterday about de-escalation. Of these 8 common sense bills that we'll advance today to support law enforcement, I'm a co-sponsor of 4. I would welcome being added as a co-sponsor to the other 4. And I think it's important that we continue to advance bipartisan bills that strengthen law enforcement. I will say, as someone who was for much of a decade responsible for the second largest law enforcement entity in my state, I was really struck that DOJ recently terminated hundreds of grants totaling nearly $1 billion. Yes, you're right, many of them went to nonprofits, but through those nonprofits, they funded things like state and local anti-terrorism training, the police officer mental health under the Valor Initiative, school-based mental health workers to prevent potential school shootings, funding for prosecutors to investigate child abuse. In my view, this particular exercise was a DOJ staffer overreaching with no consultation with the relevant DOJ career staff, and these cuts disrespect both law enforcement and, frankly, this committee. If we want to work together to reform and reshape OJP and the grant programs that make such a critical difference in the connection between federal, state, and local law enforcement, we should do it in a way that follows the law and is disciplined and organized, not in the haphazard cuts that just recently happened. Thank you for the opportunity to be heard.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. We're on the subject of grants today, and I appreciate your bringing up some of the bipartisan grants that I've been working on. We've also had a termination of a whole bevy of grants that come out of the Department of Justice. And I just want to flag some of the areas in which grants were terminated in areas where this committee has done really good work. Grants were terminated for Project Safe Neighborhoods. Over and over again, this committee has applauded Project Safe Neighborhoods. It's been 25 years, I want to say now, in the Department of Justice. Rhode Island, when I was U.S. Attorney, was one of the first states to start what is now called the Project Safe Neighborhoods program. If you're a violent gangster and you use a gun in a crime, one simple thing was, you're going federal. And that was replicated around the country. I think Project Safe Neighborhoods is a very good program with longstanding bipartisan support. Don't know why it was cut. You and I, Mr. Chairman, have done the reauthorization of the Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act. Funding for assisting states in complying with that was also cut. I think we all agree that the JJDPA, as we reauthorized it, is a good thing. It had no problem passing as a reauthorization. CARA, Comprehensive Addiction Recovery Act, was the biggest piece of opioid legislation we've ever passed. I worked on that with Republican co-sponsors to get that passed. It's been repeatedly funded. And I just don't know why something as bipartisan as funding for CARA designated programs would be cut. The Second Chance Act was also cut, which helps with people coming out of prison and going into reentry at the state level. This worked so well in Rhode Island and in other states that Senator Cornyn and I did a federal version of it, which passed without much contest. Everybody supported it for federal prisons as well, and it's been very, very successful. The most useful thing probably is helping people coming out of prison with addiction issues to get medication-assisted treatment started before they're discharged so that when they're out on the street, they're already on the program. That saved lives. It reduced reoffending. So over and over again, whether it's Project Safe Neighborhoods, JJDPA, CARA, or Second Chance, here are programs that this committee on a bipartisan basis has strongly and continually supported, and yet they're cut. So I'd like to try to get more of an explanation of that from the department. And then going forward, grants like the ones we're going to be discussing today are going to be subjected to a screen that obliges the department to look at whether there are sanctuary cities in the jurisdiction. I don't know what that actually means. It's not a legal term of art. We have a federal court and a circuit court of appeals, the First Circuit, that have determined that you need a warrant for local law enforcement to make immigration arrests. This is law enforcement. They can't go into court and say, I'm not going to obey court orders, and they shouldn't be tasked or punished with not getting grants because they are obeying court orders. This is law enforcement, for Pete's sake. School COVID vax requirements. I don't know what that has to do with anything. In Rhode Island, the municipality doesn't directly control the school. There's a separate school committee that does. So it makes it very hard to hold a police chief accountable for what a separate school committee does. There are concerns about gender ideology, so-called, their phrase, that would render an organization unsuitable for grants. I don't know what that means. Does that mean that recruiting female officers is a statement of gender ideology that would be punished? It doesn't make any sense, but who knows? We need clarity on that. No mentions of DEI or EJ. I had the unhappy circumstance of being the Attorney General when a white police officer in uniform shot and killed a black police officer out of uniform, not knowing that he was a fellow officer. It was a blue-on-blue shooting. It inflamed, for good reasons, the black community that this had happened. The man who was killed, his father was a very senior officer in the police department, and the US DOJ Community Relations Service came in to help deal with the community issues that had arisen and lower the temperature, and they were very effective. I thought we've supported the DOJ Community Relations Service always. Is bringing in CRS a DEI or, environmental justice concern? We need to know. If you've had a vandalized monument, it looks like that disqualifies you. I think there are a great number of jurisdictions that have had vandalized monuments. And I don't know that that's a legitimate test for whether somebody should get, for instance, a CARA grant to deal with opioid offenses. And finally, full compliance with all executive orders seems to be required, even where those executive orders have been thrown out of court as unconstitutional. Again, these are law enforcement agencies. You can't ask them to comply with an order that their courts have already determined to be unconstitutional, and they shouldn't be punished in terms of being unable to get Project Safe Neighborhoods, JDPA, CARA, or Second Chance grants because of that. My point here is that this is a huge mess and muddle right now, and it would be very helpful, particularly as the chair of the court subcommittee, to figure out a way to get some clarity about what DOJ really means and what people applying for the grants that we're going to approve today will need to disclose and how they need to prepare for that to make sure that these grant programs are administered fairly and with common sense.
Okay. Before I call on Klobuchar and Padilla, I will just kind of repeat, and I haven't followed up on what the Justice Department has told me, so maybe we'll find out it's not as directed towards law enforcement as I said in my opening statement. But you remember I said 93% of the grants that have been eliminated by DOJ were awarded to non-governmental entities. And then I quoted what the department said in response to my letter, that they'll reallocate the savings into the future awards that, quote, directly support law enforcement operators. I'm not going to repeat my statement, but I do have a letter that I entered in the record that I'd direct people to. Senator Klobuchar.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I hope we can get a quorum soon. I was excited to get these bills done for Police Week. This week, I joined law enforcement leaders and families of fallen officers at the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial Candlelight Vigil on Tuesday night. It was remarkable, as it always is, but it was pouring rain for 3 hours, and yet all of these families sat out there with their umbrellas out of respect for those that they had lost. All these officers were there, including a number of families and fellow officers from Burnsville, Minnesota, where we lost 2 officers and a paramedic, and officers Paul Elmstead, Matthew Ruge, and paramedic Adam Finseth, responding to a domestic violence call. They were basically ambushed, and yet they saved 7 kids. They got 7 kids out of there before they were killed. The paramedic was killed by the perpetrator while he was giving life-saving CPR to one of the officers who died. And as one of the officers, Sergeant Medlicott, said, we were there for 7 children. Nothing could be more honorable. And I don't think you can teach that kind of heroism, and I hope we remember why we're here today. I am pleased that we're advancing a number of these bills. The Honoring Our Fallen Heroes Act, a number of committee members are co-sponsors of this bill. Every day, our first responders put their lives on the line to protect all of us. As Senator Padilla knows, the whole country watched more than 16,000 firefighters and other first responders battled the wildfires across Los Angeles. Just this week in northern Minnesota, we have extensive fires, and we know there's a high incidence of cancer among firefighters, officers, first responders who are at fire scenes. And that's why Senator Kramer and I introduced our bipartisan legislation to make sure that firefighters and first responders who die or become disabled as a result of service-related cancers get the support that they've earned. This bill was inspired by a St. Paul firefighter, Mike Piter, who was exposed to toxic substances and died at a very young age. And I want to thank all of the senators who have joined as co-sponsors on the committee: Blackburn, Blumenthal, Coons, Cornyn, Cruz, Durbin, Graham, Hirono, Kennedy, Moody, Padilla, Schiff, Welsh, and Whitehouse. Second, the bill that you and I have together, the Grassley-Klobuchar bill on protecting first responders from secondary exposure. I urge our colleagues to support that bill. And then finally, the Retired Law Enforcement Officers Continuing Service Act. And this bill would establish a grant program to make sure law enforcement agencies can continue to utilize the skills that talented law enforcement retirees have built up over a career of public service. And I thank Senator Grassley for your support of that bill, and I urge our colleagues to join us.
Senator.
There was one other officer I quickly wanted to mention, Jamal Mitchell, shot and killed in the line of duty last June in Minnesota. Another ambush, and I've gotten to know his widow. And again, when you're standing there in the rain, you remember why we're here and the sacrifice that these families make every single day. So I thank our colleagues for supporting these bills.
I assume that you made this statement when I was going to call on you on each one of these bills.
Yeah, I decided to do it while you were waiting for a quorum because I believe in time efficiency. Yes.
Senator Padilla and then Senator Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, this week we come together to honor the courage, the commitment, and the sacrifice of law enforcement officers across the country. I'm proud to support the bipartisan bills that are before us today. They provide long overdue benefits to families of officers who've made the ultimate sacrifice. They provide mental health support to officers under strain, and they strengthen community policing efforts that keep our neighborhoods safe. But as we are working together on a bipartisan basis to advance these bills, I also want us to confront a serious and growing threat to how these programs are funded and administered. The Department of Justice has issued a sweeping and likely unlawful directive that threatens to cut off vital public safety grants to jurisdictions, not because they've misused funds, not because they fail to serve their communities, but because they don't align with the administration's political views on immigration enforcement. I like to call it what it is. It's an attempt to turn what is supposed to be nonpartisan public safety funding into a political weapon. Federal grants like Burn JAG and COPS and the Public Safety Officers Benefits Program were created by Congress for clear, lawful purposes. Nothing in those statutes give the Department of Justice the authority to cut off funds to law enforcement officers, paramedics, or grieving families simply because of where they work. It's not just wrong, it's dangerous. It's the kind of federal overreach that threatens to defund the very police officers that we are all here to support. Our officers didn't sign up to be pawns in a political fight. They signed up to serve, to protect and to serve. And we have a duty to stand with them, regardless of their zip code and regardless of who's in the White House. So as we move these bills forward, I would just urge the committee to send a clear message that public safety funding isn't a partisan bargaining chip. It's a lifeline. And we owe it to our officers and the communities that they serve to keep this funding above politics and to stay focused on what matters most, and that's the public safety of all communities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Moody.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you giving us a chance to remark on Police Week and the bills that we're putting forward today in a bipartisan way. As Florida's former Attorney General, certainly as a former federal prosecutor, as the wife of a law enforcement officer, I have had the opportunity to know personally and work closely with so many law enforcement officers across the state of Florida and indeed across the United States of America. And as those of us who have worked with them know, they are the ones that stand on that very thin line between good and evil and chaos and order, between light and dark, and they do so in a way that shows that they are selfless in purpose, and they stand there bravely and confidently without hesitation to protect us in many instances when other folks would run in the opposite direction. And I, for one, have sat in admiration of those kinds of people and those that wear the badge and those that chose professionally to take that oath many, many times. And not only in my prior experience and roles, but now as a United States Senator, I continue to be inspired by them every day. And I think it is important that we recognize Police Week more than just an annual tradition where certain ceremonies are held or memorials are done or where we pass resolutions. I think we need to remember that it is a promise to them every year that we will not forget those that paid that ultimate sacrifice so that we could live in a free nation under a rule of law because there were men and women of integrity that signed up for those dangerous jobs. And I think Police Week is a way that we that have been entrusted with the great responsibility in these roles can say we will never forget them and we will never forget the families that lost them in the line of duty. Because we know every day that they put on those uniforms, it doesn't just include that badge, it includes a bulletproof vest. And that is an absolute must in this day and age, and they know what they are taking on symbolically when they put that on every day. They know what they are taking on our behalf. And so I just wanted to say thank you to those men and women who sign up for these roles, continue to sign up for them, are led by a mission in life to be part of something that is greater than themselves. I admire that as a person, and I admire that as a leader in this country. I thank the families who know that they bring home with them every day a unique set of stressors. And there's often an unpredictable schedule that goes along with that. So I say thank you to all of the families of law enforcement. And finally, on this particular day in Police Week, when we have Democrats and Republicans coming together to put forth legislation to support law enforcement, both federal and state, no matter what color they wear, blue, green, and tan, I think it is remarkable that on this day we are putting forward not just one, not two, not three, but 8 pieces of legislation out of this committee, and we are doing that unified, saying we support you, we support your families, and indeed we support this free nation that is held together in a stable, prosperous way by the men and women that enforce the laws of we the people. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for giving me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the great men and women that wear the badge, and on behalf of this committee that is putting forward important pieces of legislation today.
The first item on our agenda is the nomination of Jason Quinez, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. We can't vote on it until we get our.
I'd like to speak on the nomination if you're waiting. to
Do
get
that
some-
now.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your calling this nominee, and I want to make a statement since we are continuing to honor the blue slip. You've said that.
Yes.
I've said that. Senator Gray before you said as much. We did it for 4 years. A blue slip gives the attorneys from the state where the appointment is being made the option of approving or disapproving. We're an integral part of that decision process. I think that is important, but we have to work hard to make sure it continues. I'm sorry to say that the White House is reaching out to individual senators in a capacity that is not consistent with the blue slip. But if we're going to hold fast to that as a principle, I urge the White House to work on a bipartisan basis to help. I also want to say that I understand Janine Perot was sworn in yesterday to serve as interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. For the record, when President Trump's first term, over 80 U.S. attorneys were appointed, no roll call votes in this committee, no roll call votes on the floor. They all went by voice vote. That world has changed because of the insistence of one Republican senator. In the last 4 years, we are now required to take roll calls on each U.S. attorney, at least it's become the precedent of the committee. Each U.S. attorney gets a roll call vote in the committee, and then because of former Senator and now Vice President Vance, a requirement they also get a roll call vote on the floor. It means more and more votes for us on the floor for things that we already know the outcome. And I am troubled by that it's reached this point. On this particular one with Janine, I'm concerned that this is not consistent with what we were trying to do. We wanted to give a president an option of an interim U.S. attorney while we at the Senate level deliberate, advise, and consent on a permanent appointment. That has been changed dramatically. Instead of 120 days, we now have a daisy chain situation where Ed Martin was almost 120 days. He stepped aside. Janine Perot comes in for her 120 days. I think that is a violation of what we were trying to achieve, to give interim authority. Instead, what we have now is the possibility of repeated appointments over and over again for the same position. These interim positions mean that we in the Senate are giving up our constitutional authority and responsibility. That's a mistake. I yield.
Along this line, if you figure that we have 93 U.S. attorneys and a minimum of 2 hours of debate that has to be eaten up, and a half hour if we do it within a half hour to cast a vote, it'll take 232 hours of floor time to get all 93 U.S. attorneys approved. So I guess we're going, I don't know how it's going to be handled, but we'll.
I raised the question on the floor repeatedly with Senator Vance not to do this because the nominees were not controversial, but he insisted on it, and now he's established a precedent that is very difficult for me to ignore.
I didn't talk to Senator Vance about it, but I did talk to another senator at that time and pleaded with him not to hold up. And I'm not going to say what sort of a response I got, but it wasn't very positive. And then I told the Republican caucus in January of this year that what has been announced by Schumer last week was bound to happen. And I just want people to be alerted to it. Now, I don't know how you handle U.S. attorneys, but if you and I could reach any sort of compromise on it, I'd be glad to do it, but I think we're too low level to get that done. We still don't have a quorum. We need to find out, are we going to get a quorum or aren't we? There's no sense in sitting around here.
11:15.
What?
11:15. That's when you
We're going to have we're going to have a quorum at 11:15.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman.
Who is it? Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm wondering why we're waiting for a quorum. Is it appropriate to speak on the bills?
Yes,
Thank you. May I be recognized for that purpose?
please do that.
I want to thank, this has to do with the Protect Our Children Reauthorization Act of 2025, which is on our agenda for today. I want to thank Senator Blumenthal for his partnership on the bill, as well as all of our colleagues for their support. We have to continue to do what we can to protect the most vulnerable in our society. To that end, it's critical to support law enforcement in their efforts to catch child predators and to fight online sexual exploitation. The Protect Our Children Reauthorization Act does this by reauthorizing the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Forces, the ICAC, which are the state and local law enforcement entities that investigate and prosecute online sexual abuse and exploitation. The PROTECT Act authorizes training and technical assistance, victim services, community education, and importantly, forensic and investigative funding. Online crimes against children have unfortunately become an increasing threat due to technological advances. It makes me shudder when I think that our society will be judged about how we treat our most vulnerable, and particularly our children. The PROTECT Act is a critical step toward better safeguarding our children by providing the backbone of funding for law enforcement to track down and arrest offenders. And Mr. Chairman, if I may proceed, also speak on the Strong Communities Act, which is set for our agenda today while we're waiting for a quorum. I'm proud to co-lead the Strong Communities Act with Senator Peters, and I thank my colleagues on the committee for supporting this bill. As we know, we've all heard from law enforcement groups this week, Police Week, and that one of the biggest challenges right now for police and law enforcement agencies is recruiting and retaining officers. The Strong Communities Act will address this problem by allowing funds under the Community-Oriented Policing Services Grant Program, the COPS program, to be used by local law enforcement agencies to send both existing officers and new recruits to training programs. In return for attending these training programs, the officers agree to serve for a set number of years in the funding agency. In order to build trust within local communities, the bill also requires that the officers live within or near the jurisdiction of the funding agency. This bill passed the Senate last Congress, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to ensure that this year we can advance this bill through both chambers and onto the President's desk to become law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman,
We're supposed to, yes, go ahead, Senator.
while we're
Brown.
waiting for quorum, I would like to ask unanimous consent to be added as a co-sponsor on S539 and S1563.
I think you'll be added.
Thank you.
Senator White.
May I be recognized to speak to the two bills that will be considered when the quorum arrives? I want to first thank Senator Hawley for his leadership on the Support and Treatment for Officers in Crisis, so-called STOIC Act. We originally passed this in 2019. It provides resources for law enforcement officers to get support when the stress of the job gets to them, very often on a peer-to-peer basis. It has been very well received in the law enforcement community. This is a clean reauthorization with no changes to the bill, so it should be non-controversial and extremely bipartisan. Hawley, Whitehouse, Blumenthal, Hirono, Coons, Grassley, Welch, Booker, Klobuchar, and Durbin. The second one of my bills that will be voted on today is a new one, improving police critical aid for responding to emergencies, which Senator Cornyn and I have done, co-sponsored by Senator Tillis, Coons, and Durbin. This is to address the situation in which police officers are the first to arrive at a scene where somebody has suffered traumatic injuries before the EMTs have a chance to get there, so that they have the equipment necessary and the training necessary to provide immediate trauma services while they're waiting for the EMTs to show up. This makes a lot of sense. It follows very much the logic of the bulletproof vests bill that we passed, allowing for burn JAG grant funds to go through. And I would urge all of my colleagues to vote in favor of it and thank Senator Cornyn for his good work making sure that this day has come to pass.
Okay, thank
Those
you
are two of the
very much.
bills.
Now we're losing everybody. I'm sorry to say this, it's not a very good way to honor Police Week, but I think that we might as well end this meeting because we're not going to have a quorum. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.